Each business has a founder, and each founder has a story. How did they come up with an idea? What challenges did they have to overcome? Why are they doing it? What are they hoping to achieve? Let's go behind the scenes and unveil interesting stories.
Hi everyone, and we are back here in the lobby studio. Basically in Anita's place, so we're not talk about the wine or making sandwiches, but we'll, move more to the technological, topics. I have two exciting guests here. They basically stopped by in Slovenia. They took a long flight from California, if I'm right. Mitja and Greg, a warm welcome here in studio, and thanks for stopping by. It's a great pleasure and honor to have you all both here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
How are you, basically? So I know, Greg, that you are a little bit jet-lagged. So are you feeling okay, all set and prepared to get some, kilometers in your legs on your bike?
I'm here to ride. I went to one of the organic farms in Slovenia yesterday and saw some happy cows, so up in this part of the region. So really good to be traveling again. I've missed Slovenia. I haven't been here since the lull in COVID back in September. And I've been in Slovenia more than Mitja, and he's a native.
That's right. Last time I was here was February 2020, right before the COVID hit. And then I just stayed in California until it was time to come back.
So to have a little bit the background, so we first met basically last year when we have an interesting blockchain panel. You're both the co-founders of the Global ID company. Maybe just for the beginning, for people to get to know each other, to know you. So what is basically Global Idea? To have just a little bit, the global perspective on what you do, what it's all about, when it's all started. So California, Slovenia, so where did you meet exactly? Interesting story.
You want to go ahead?
Yeah, I can go ahead. We both have slightly different versions, I would say, but no, so I moved to US almost 8 years ago.
You won the lottery, right?
I won the green card lottery, moved to US, chose Silicon Valley as a hub, left everybody behind, all the family and friends, and just me and my wife moved there. And I started working at a company, and then I met Greg through that company, and in a way I was poached one way or another. But
I think I had to pay a penalty for you.
Yeah. But I remember the day when Greg came to the office and he said, look, I have this identity idea. And I was like, oh, that sounds interesting. And then we dug into it more. And then it was basically all about like the way the internet works today is broken, right? So we have these big guys and Google and Facebook and everybody else. And there's a ton of problem with everything. And I want to change that. And I was like, well, count me in. I'm in. It sounds very interesting. And then, so we started working, and now it has been almost 6 years, 5.5 years. And yeah, the whole basic idea about Global ID is that we're trying to it's not just identity. It's more about that it starts with identity. Like the 2000s were all about this, we're moving everything online. And then 2010s were all about the social and like finances and actually getting a kind of really good grasp of like, how does life look like online? And I think 2020s and onwards is really going to be about identity, because everything kind of starts with identity. So going back, what Global is trying to do is we're basically trying to, the big problem that we face today is that before everybody was online, it was very easy to make interactions with one another. And those engagements were kind of like really trusted because you were able to speak to somebody. Not everybody was able to even get a phone and so on. So it was, everybody kind of, the trust levels were much higher than today. When you go online, and you can be pretty much anybody you want. So this kind of like is the root of Global ID, which is we're trying to make this digital trust into a utility. So it becomes so easy to use, it becomes so cheap to use that everybody kind of uses that to establish some level of trust.
Mm-hmm.
I'll kind of stop there because I want to give Greg over. His story is even more fascinating. And
we will deep dive into the the global idea and the product and then everything behind this a little bit later. But maybe just an interesting point of view. So you moving to US. So what was so fascinating there? So the whole San Francisco, Silicon Valley, technological buzz. Everything happening there like a technological world combined there. So
yeah. It's a long story, but well, I always, in a way, liked how America, like especially after World War II, they imported the best scientists even before that. So I was always amazed that like it's just how effective they were at like just generating so many ideas, executing so many ideas, and I remember I was just finishing high school and I was really into hip hop and DJing and stuff. So we took like a 10-day trip to New York. And when I came back, my mother knows it. Like she remembers it. She told me that the first thing when I got back from that 10-day trip was I told her, "Mom, I'm gonna move to US." And then she kind of forgot about it. I kind of forgot about it until what was it, like 15 years later. When I said, "Well, Mom, you know what? I'm moving to US," and she told me that, but actually the last day when I was leaving Slovenia, because I totally forgot about that story. But yeah, to me it was always I don't know. Slovenia is great and everything. It was a good testing ground, but like Silicon Valley was Silicon Valley. This is where like the ideas happen. It's not only about the capital. At the time when I moved to US, the capital was already pretty much all over the world. It was more about I don't know, playing the big leagues. Get it done. Like just like if you want to do something, either you go big or you go home. So that was the main thing.
Well, that doesn't make any sense. We're building it, but we're building it here in Slovenia. So you went all the way there, and everybody working on this is right here in Slovenia.
Not everyone, but if you have a big presence in Slovenia, that is true. That is true. It was just when we started with the 4 guys that I pretty much raised, and we just took it from there.
But when you first moved to US and worked there in San Francisco, you worked on blockchain related projects or not really?
Not really. So the first time I got there, I didn't know anybody. I had to establish my network. So the easiest thing actually was I got a hold of like this contact that introduced me to somebody else, and they were looking for somebody that would build the whole technology part of the company. They were a marketing agency. And to me, it was very interesting because they had a really good clients like Google and so on. And I needed contacts. Like I had zero network. And I said, fine, I'll go there. I'll build the team. But then eventually I knew like my heart's always going to go back to entrepreneurship. And when Greg came with the idea again, it was just like I was hooked right off the bat.
And what about the Slovenian community? Because in San Francisco, there are quite a few Slovenian founders already. So is there like a network of Slovenians just to have a soft landing there, or what is?
It was so when I moved there, we still have a Slovenian startup house. So we actually lived there for the first month, which made our transition a little bit easier. Later that didn't go as planned, and I think they closed it down or they moved it to the Valley instead of San Francisco. But I think eventually they shut it down. But the thing about like, I moved there to mingle with everybody, not just Slovenians.
Yeah,
and I know that like Russian community is big, like even Serbian community and Croatian community are big. Slovenia not so much, I would say. We do meet occasionally, and that means maybe every like couple of times a year, if anything. Like nothing happening during the COVID times. But yeah, to me it's more about meeting the right people, not necessarily where they're from.
And is now kind of the situation in San Francisco getting back to normal? Because as I heard or read or something, so a lot of people went out of San Francisco out to the is this true, or is this more like
It is. A lot of people are going either north to Washington, Nevada, and so on. A lot of people are going to Texas as well. Those are some of the tax-related things, but also like San Francisco in general was one of the highest marketplaces to rent, to buy a house, and so on. And it's hard to kind of like just keep up with that. And as soon as all of the companies started to move remotely, it was kind of like a no-brainer for people to move closer to either nature and not kind of share 3 walls with neighbors and so on. So
it's great, great. So then Greg poached you, paid the penalty.
I paid a penalty. Mitja was good. He had a team. So, and I have a history of poaching people from companies, and it works well. So it's usually worth the price of poaching. And in Silicon Valley, everything starts from something else. There's a PayPal mafia. There's a Ripple mafia, and so we think there'll be a global ID mafia. And so I've kind of been through some of those mafias.
So, but you also, just to correct, correct me if I'm mistaken, you're one of the early investors also in Twitter, right? So
that's right.
Any other super famous startups that you invested in?
Well, Jack was living with me when he started Twitter. He was in the backyard. He hacked into one of my earlier companies, and I'd hired him. He was interested in Dispatch, and so I was there for the beginning of Square as a risk advisor, and was first money in it. Wrote that first check along with Draper and for Coinbase, and was with the fund that did the first investment in Robinhood. So more recently, some of the things that I was very fortunate to be in on was Filecoin, was in a Y Combinator class with me, and also Solana, the super fast blockchain. So I have kind of a Forrest Gump lifestyle where I've just happened to be, at the lunch table when somebody said, well, I got this idea for proof of stake. And I'm like, I'd buy that for $1 and made those investments. And so, better to be lucky than smart in that regard. And so all of those things have this issue of how do you make them compliant? And I have a bit of a background in that. And so the global ID piece is how do you bring identity to these new ideas, because they're really great ideas, but a lot of them are things that make people with badges and guns and that work in Washington D.C. and other policy centers nervous, and I'm the dispenser of chill pills, even though on the other hand I'm kind of the one who's kind of turning up the heat.
But your background basically is in technology, or is super diverse and colorful. So to look at your, let's say, track record and history. So you were first entrepreneur and then investor, or how everything started on your side before the global ID and all these investments?
Well, it always starts with a bicycle, whether it's a paper route or I did race the Pro-Am circuit a little bit, not quite at the level of Roglic or Pogačar, but I do know that circuit. I worked for Booz Allen, a management consulting firm. I left actually to do the bike messenger industry, all the guys with piercings and tattoos, and we had a model that let the couriers pick what work they were going to do, sort of Uber before Uber, and that did grow and become the world's largest on-demand dispatch organization, and that's what Jack Dorsey hacked into. He was very interested in dispatch, and we learned a lot about text messaging and payments, and I am not a co-founder of Twitter or Square. I was just there putting milk in the fridge, but it did lead to us learning with text messaging, 140 characters, and with the democratization, not just of publishing, but of payments. So that was Square, and really everything now with everything we're doing is a democratization experiment. And so crypto was with Ripple was democratization of who could hold money. You didn't have to ask permission. And really global ID has just been, why can't you own your identity? Why does a company or a country have to hold your identity? In true democratization, it's bottom up, not top down. And so all these things have a common theme, which is basically how to give everybody a seat at the table. And so that's the same whether it was Twitter or Square or with Coinbase. It was kind of like, PayPal for Bitcoin, to things like Robinhood. All these things are, and even like Filecoin. Instead of having Dropbox be a centralized location, this is just like a system that's distributed, but that will store all the files in the world. And so that theme is always there.
And this democratization has a background in your that drives you so much, or what's with that democratization and that is like a so strong force driving you, through all your basically professional life in a way?
Well, so this is where, culturally and politically, this is where Europe's a little bit different from the United States. Like in Europe, privacy is considered like a human right. And in America, it's just like you check the box and you sign that right away. The flip side is in America, like the political history was that the individual had all the power and then they gave a limited grant to the government. And so what wasn't given to the government was with the individual. So there's a radical proposition that infuses a number of other problematic tenets of American philosophy, that it starts with the individual and it's a limited grant of authority to the government. In Europe, you sort of start top down. The government gives rights to people and it protects them, et cetera, whatnot. And so it just depends on, glass half empty, glass half full. In our situation, the philosophy is, and it's a little bit libertarian and a little bit radical, is that it all starts with people. And so you do end up with the ability to give all your rights away to something like creepy Facebook versus like WeChat in China is kind of Orwellian top down, or, Europe, you guys have like, the Pavel from like Telegram, and that's like kind of more of a Mad Max world. And then you have kind of a bureaucratic GDPR world. So these are all just different cultural mixes. But you put it all together, the thing that I think is really tremendous about, Bitcoin and blockchain, it started a little over 10 years ago, is that you can conceive of a world where you don't have to ask for permission to do things. And that innovation is, to me, as big, if not bigger, than the internet. Not having to ask permission. It may not be the most efficient way to do things, but it raises the proposition, is what kind of innovation do you get in a world where you don't have to ask permission? Now, you still need identity because we still live in a world of law and compliance matters and money laundering, et cetera. And so if you have all these technologies out there like DeFi or distributed ledgers, and you don't have an identity to sign them with, well, then you're kind of living in a Mad Max world. And, well, why should I give you this money? He says, well, I have the private key, or in Mad Max, because my gun's bigger than your gun. And so if you don't want to live in a Mad Max world, you're going to need something like identity so we can trust each other again, because it's not like we're living in little tribes. We're living at a global level. We're living digitally. So you better have a form of identity that can keep up. And if you don't want that to be owned by like Facebook or your government, you better come up with something else.
And why do you think, this global need for such, your kind of solution? So the control identity solution has come pretty late in, if you look at the development of all the other ecosystems. So you mentioned the social media and social networks were before basically the identity was sorted out. It still isn't in a way, properly sorted out. So you have first the plane and then figure out how to ride or fly. So it's like the identity should be basically first if we look at the order of things, right? So first identity and then everything on top, because as you mentioned, the identity is like crucial and the central point of us, individuals living and working and doing stuff in our world.
Well, there's sort of a historical moment in time when all accounts, anything that had to do with an account, became electronic. Things like credit cards and whatnot. And the world could have gone in one of two ways. You could have said, let's make a ledger of identities and assign accounts to them, or let's create a ledger of accounts and assign identities to them. Now, unfortunately, the world went there. So like when I'm at American Express, my name's Robert Gregory Kidd. I go by Greg Kidd so I don't get confused with my dad. So American Express still can't figure out that Robert Kidd and Greg Kidd are the same person. And like all of that has been a problem ever since. And it's just one of those kind of things. It's like America still being on like the imperial system. I think it's us and like one other tin pot country, I don't know what it is, that's still doing imperial. Everybody else is on metric, or we have 110 plugs. And so, if somebody came, like a Martian came or some and saw that you were still doing like, 110 and 220 or imperial and metric, and they would say like, what the hell, but so identity is one of those things that it's just sort of a historical argument that we did keeping track of accounts and identity as an afterthought. And so now we live in a world where, you have all this stuff of phishing attacks because, everything is usernames and passwords, and you never really know whether you're dealing with a real identity, and yet you still don't even have good privacy protections. So we have bad privacy, bad security, lack of transparency. But, we've gotten pretty comfortable with it, and it works well enough. It's not so broken that society stops. And so we end up in a world where it works kind of okay. There's a lot of money laundering. There's a lot of people excluded. But it's not broken enough to get better. Now, that's the great thing about pandemics. Things get bad enough, and so people have Zoom bombing attacks, and people say, is there a better way than Zoom to have like a video conference when you have like something mission critical? If Zoom calls are okay maybe for like a classroom, but if you have to get together to decide whether to use the nuclear codes to fire a missile, or other critical infrastructure things, or super secret board meetings, a Zoom call where if you have the link and you can, it's probably not the most secure system in the world, yet that's kind of like the best we could do for the pandemic.
So the need basically for really efficient, centralized solutions basically was, as all the matters accelerated by the pandemic, right? So, how did you feel, or how did the pandemic affect on development of global idea? Did it speed it up in any way?
Yeah, of course. I mean, I remember when we started, and we were kind of going around and even talking to some other VCs and so on, and everybody was like, what are you doing, identity? I don't know what that is. Like, I don't know how you're going to do this. And then a couple of years later, they were already, identity, that might be something. And then when the pandemic came, like, it was, now everybody's talking about how important identity is. Like, only in 2020, I think the fraud in fintech went up like 60-70%. Because everybody went online, nobody was able to go to the bank anymore, and all of a sudden everybody was exploiting people, and as Greg mentioned, like a lot of hacks happened, and it's just, the need for trust is at the highest as it ever were, for sure.
But I'm basically pretty in general, on a general level of knowledge about the identity and these solutions, but basically all these, single sign-ins from Google and Facebook, these are basically, how do you see those like technological tries? Because this is, as I understood, or, as these, they should be like, they're like centralized, identity points for which I can, sign into different services, but actually they're not, and why they're not so sufficient, secure, what's broken in that system? So
because the Highlander series, you have this one sword to rule them all, and you have to kill everybody else. And so, like, if there's this movie Demolition Man, and in the future, when Sylvester Stallone does something good, they all go out to celebrate. And he goes, well, where are we going? And he goes, like, we're going to Taco Bell. And he goes, well, Taco Bell sucks. Why are we going to Taco Bell? Well, they won the fast food war, so now all restaurants are Taco Bell. So single sign-on would work if like Apple could vanquish Google, if like Vodafone could vanquish. You have to have somebody work, but if single sign-on and you show up and you're like, well, you're not in that silo, so no soup for you, well, then single sign-on is really not it's just a bunch of things happening in parallel. The question is, how do you make something interoperable? And the amazing thing about the World Wide Web and the domain name system is it's not a siloed system. It's not like there's one system for Brazil and another for China. Like the World Wide Web and the domain name system is a global protocol, just like TCP/IP. This is like SMTP, just like SMS. And so the question is, what's the protocol for identity? Is there a namespace that could be global? And just like Bitcoin is like, it is a protocol that operates across all legal jurisdictions. It's not owned by any company. And so in this last decade, we're getting the concept that money could have a global protocol and potentially identity as well. Now, currently right now, there are still a lot of companies out there like a WeChat and a Facebook. But to us, That's just like there was an AOL and a CompuServe, and they were all walled gardens.
Yeah.
And they kind of laughed at the internet, and now, they're just footnotes in history. And so the question is, from an identity point of view, are we going to continue to have this hodgepodge of non-interoperable identity sign-ins, even though they're pretty big and they have billions of users, but they don't interoperate? And the identities behind them, the credentials for who that person is, you can't trust them for doing anything. You can't trust that for voting, for medical records, for money. It's not a strong enough identity. Facebook makes its money from like clickbait. It doesn't make its money from having like confidence that the people who are saying things or the people that are reading things are real people. That's just not part of their business model. And I'm somewhat responsible for it too, because I hung around that little company named Twitter, and some of those things, some of the things on Twitter, they're not true. And those people, they're not real. And so their business models and their realities weren't concerned with high level of trust. In fact, they're contributors to the trust deficit. And so kind of a mea culpa here is we're looking to address that. And again, we're not some big, mighty Highlander victory. We're working on a protocol that's kind of what we call a weak protocol, that people could use it to interoperate so they don't get trapped in a silo again. And so when we're talking about single sign-on, we're talking about the big single sign-on, just kind of like DNS is a protocol-based solution as opposed to a big platform that's going to kill other big platforms. Yeah.
So your vision is pretty big. I mean, and so you also have, according to that big vision, you have a big team. You're working on this for many years. Could you just I was so fascinated about the dimensions of your company. Could you just maybe...
What's the team size in Slovenia now?
We're almost at 100, but we have 160 people total throughout the world. So we have some people in Russia, New Zealand, Latin America as well, US as headquarters and so on. And yeah, the majority of people in Slovenia.
But the interesting thing is Slovenia could be, just like Bitstamp kind of became, put crypto and Bitcoin at the center. Like I remember coming to Gorenska Bank and I'm like, holy smokes, you're doing this really risky thing. And they're like, oh, this isn't the riskiest thing we do. And I'm like, really? What else do you do? Oh, we do like, we do like the banking for like Iran and stuff. And like, why? It's just the central bank came to us. And I said, why do they come to you? You're only like the 8th largest bank in Slovenia. And they said, well, the other 7 said no. And so, you get to be the center of things at different times, like in history. And so it is a really interesting thing. Slovenia's played a critical role in the history of crypto, the first regulated exchange, the place where everybody went after Mt. Gox blew up. And we think that from this point of view, that from an identity point of view, there's no reason that Slovenia wouldn't be a world leader in this area. And so the talent pool here is great. We're here to kind of poach more people. I have other companies that I'm invested in Slovenia, so I have to be careful not to poach from one company to the other. But we think that the technical skill here is good, and the loyalty here versus in Silicon Valley where people are always chasing the next shiny object. Yeah. Solving this identity nut thing is going to take time, and it's going to take a committed group of people, and it's a whole ecosystem and infrastructure. So it's great to overlay this on top of a community here that's already pretty crypto literate. And this is kind of like, for us, the center of the world. In Silicon Valley, to me, it seems like sometimes better weather. It rains here all the time. But in terms of building in this discipline, like, we have high confidence that this is the team, this is the place, and we can build it. It's just easy to raise money over in Silicon Valley. It doesn't mean you have to build it there.
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, because it seems like on the first side that Slovenia has maybe a little bit missed those, to become like the pioneer in the blockchain and crypto. But when I'm hearing from you, it's still kind of is keeping this title, but it's not so maybe so shiny, because the hype is a little bit down on this cryptos. Okay, but not talking about the last period, but now when the Bitstamp was established and all this big ICOs area was kind of the Slovenia will be and the center of the the crypto and the blockchain technology, but the base is still and is there and it's getting bigger, right? So if I understood you.
Yeah, Slovenia, like all the ICOs, I mean, all the Slovenian thinking around this was also a little bit of a victim of the crypto winter that we are out of now. But one other thing I just want, like, there's 2 million people in Slovenia, and I know for 3 exchanges that are like pretty big, like the, so we mentioned Bitstamp, but there's also GateHub and others, apart from a number of ICOs that I've heard of that are coming from Slovenia that are actually good. They're not scams. And like,
but I was with Origin Trail.
Yeah, for example.
It's basically doing blockchain so you can trust the food chain.
Yeah.
Whether for food or vaccines, or I found they're doing it for so you can trust whiskey, like the chain of origin and chain of provenance for whiskey, and but so there is amazing talent here, disproportionate, and you got a few guys that pretty handy on a bicycle too.
So bicycle is your other love in your life. You keep mentioning it. So you'll be here in Slovenia, and here you're planning a great trip also with bikes. So where will be people can chase you and talk to you what you'll be riding? So
well, we're heading up. I think I'm riding up, weather permitting. It's I think the rain here in Slovenia is pretty wet, but I think we're going to be riding up on Friday, and then we're going to start in Lake Bled, do a loop around the Juliana Alps, and back down here. So
you have your own Global ID Giro di Slovenia tour.
We do, but like with Global, if you download Global ID, you can reach me at Greg Kidd. You pick some ridiculous name. What's your name?
Mine is just M. The easiest to remember. Right. Yes.
And that's really all you need in Global ID. Yep. Your identity is just a name, just like you have a handle in Twitter or in Skype. It's just like the domain name system. Now it's the identity name system. And you can have more than one name, but no 2 people or 2 organizations can have the same name. And so really all we are is a naming layer on top of all the other internet, which is really all the World Wide Web is. But it means for me to send you money or medical records or a missile, I don't need to know your account number. I don't need to know your email address, your phone number. I don't need to know any of that. I just send it to your name. All of that other private information is abstracted below. And really the big difference between us and how we think about privacy and GDPR. GDPR is all about, well, I'm going to share this data with you, and then I'm going to tell you to forget it. Except I didn't invent a time machine, so it's kind of hard to forget it because I already shared it with you. We come from the American Nancy Reagan point of view, which is just say no. So when you ask me to share data, I'm like, I'm not going to share data with you. I'll give you a zero knowledge proof. I can prove I'm myself, I'm over 18. I can send through a level of indirection so you can ship me something. But we don't share the data. We share proofs about the data. We share indirect information. So privacy is preserved by not sharing the PII. But what we do want to know is that your public name, your public-facing name is M or Greg Kidd or whatever you pick. So we don't have to worry about things like phone numbers or addresses or any of that. Everything is just identity to identity. And that is a simpler world. It is a more private world. It is a more secure world. It's transparent because I can learn about your reputation. Again, you can get all sorts of proofs, credentials. If I want to send you my certificate that I graduated from a university, why can't I send you that as a token? Do I really have to go back to my university and beg them to give me a copy of dude, I earned that diploma. Why can't I have a copy to send who I want? Why do I have to keep coming to you every time, hat in hand, please send a copy of my diploma to X, Y, or Z?
So at what stage is the Global ID at the moment? So I have the app Global ID, and so what is at the moment available to all the users? What can we use, and what's kind of the roadmap?
What we're building is, as I mentioned before, this ways to kind of engage in trust, right? So we call that trusted engagements. And what you can currently do is what Greg talked about, this interoperable kind of thing, which is in technical terms called verifiable credential. And the beauty of that is that it's kind of like a 3-way system where you have the issuer who issues a credential. For example, if we use Greg's case, a university would issue a diploma. to you, and you are the holders, right? So nobody, not even Global ID, holds that credential. You're holding that credential, and then you control it. I think the key word there is also control. And then you have the third party in the system, which is the verifier. Now, the verifier might be, for example, okay, I want to apply to a different college, I want to go somewhere else, I want to cross the border. And those are all examples of verifiers, and then you control when you share either a zero knowledge proof or the PII, because in certain cases you have to share the PII, to kind of like get access to things. So those verifiable credentials already are in our app, and you can get them. We call, like Greg loves to say, this Easter egg hunt, because we already have over 30 of different ones, including, so for example, there's a service in US that kind of connects to 90% of the universities where you can actually get that credential from a university. We have 4 different government ID services in there, and email, social, different things.
Mobile phone. So you collect all these credentials, but the other thing, like you can have all these, but without messaging and money, you're kind of like, can't really do much. So identity just in itself is boring, but if you can send things around and use your credentials to message people with confidence, to send them money with confidence, then you're kind of in the game. And so the point isn't for everybody to download and have global ID. The point is for developers to not have to worry about identity, messaging, and money in their apps. They should be building their marketplace, their vertical. This is just a tool set for them, right? So we're like under the hood. It's like an inside Intel strategy. We're more like a Stripe or a Plaid or a Twilio. There is an app, but it's kind of a reference implementation, and you know.
And on top of that, so we have messaging, we have payments. We are also putting a lot of efforts into groups, because we figured out that actually people do want to build communities, and this is what Facebook figured out as well. I remember the day when Facebook came out, Zuckerberg, and said, we're going to go into groups and Libra and so on, and people came to me and they were like, but Facebook's trying to do exactly what Global ID is trying to do. And I was like, yes, we didn't know that, and they have a lot of data. So it's a similar blueprint. The difference are those credentials that pretty much you control your own data. And groups is something that we think this is the future where everybody's going. So if, for example, if you want to establish a biking group in Slovenia, I mean, having a credential that you are from Slovenia, not necessarily to say which street you live on or city and so on, just so that you're from Slovenia and you can kind of get a community around that, it's a pretty big thing. And if you know that others went through the same thing, getting those credentials and proving to join a group, that's a much higher barrier to enter a group, which again goes back to trust. So groups is something that also is going to become very powerful in the future. And when I say groups, I mean not just credentials, it's also, again, the messaging part and the payments part. So it's kind of like tying all those things together. And as Greg mentioned, yes, we don't want developers to think about identity, payments, messaging, or all. They should focus on the core thing that they're building and pretty much forget about everything else. We're the good guys that make sure that we don't know anything and that the users actually get all the stuff, and goes back to democratization that Greg was talking about. I mean, somebody has to do it, and Facebook is not going to do it. Google's not going to do it. They're not going to change their business models.
It's not in their interest, basically, because it ruins their business model, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, technically, they have the wherewithal to do it, but you know, it's like what Elon said about all the other car companies. Hey, look, they can build electric cars, and even if they build good ones, the problem is their business model right now is built on making money from gas-powered cars. So the better their electric cars get, they're just competing with their own product line. If like Volkswagen comes up with a really great electric car and sells 10% of its cars are electric, it puts pressure on the other 90% of its product line. We have nothing to lose. And so in this situation, we, Global ID, we have nothing to lose because, you know, we have no users like Facebook and Google to start with. So we're starting from zero. So everything else, like they say, like when you're lying on the ground, you can't fall down. So that's the great thing about being a startup. It's only up from here.
So from a user perspective is to really like, you know, to simplify, where is my identity? So how my identity cannot be like fake. So if my identity is in my phone or it's in the ledger, so where basically if I use Global ID as my basically identity, where is technically my identity?
I mean, physically, let's put it this way, yeah, your identity lives on your phone. We have built certain set of, how to put it, protocols that, because to be able to kind of restore your identity, because a lot of times people are going to lose phones. But the main thing is that globally it does not have access to your identity. So one of the cool concepts that's already in the app is the concept of trustees, where you can appoint 2 or 3 of your friends, and if you lose your phone, all you have to do is contact those 3 friends, 2 of them actually, and your identity is going to be restored. You don't even have to remember any of the keys or anything associated with it.
We build a copy in the cloud, but we don't have the keys. So, the government can come and pound on the door and says, give us all that data. We're like, here it is. Give us the keys. We're like, well, sorry, we don't have the keys. And so, and even in a place like China, you say, well, how are you going to operate in China? They want to like spy on everybody. And we're like, well, in China, like, are you guys going to decrypt all the data? I'm like, no, man, it's going to be encrypted. But if like the Chinese say, if you're like in China, you got to give the China government a key. That's it, right? Like it's not that the data is not encrypted as in WeChat. It's just that who gets those keys? And the first in line to not get the keys is us. So we built a system where you can come and kidnap me and shake us down. I'm like, but dude, I don't have the keys. So that's part of that's a different kind of privacy by design by not giving us, the architects of the system, a copy of the keys. But it does mean if you lose your phone and you need to restore it, you need to set up through some other distributed system, i.e. your friends or peers. They're your method for getting your account restored, not us.
And it's not like, stored in a chip, like it's like biometrical information like on an iPhone. So it's on a special chip. So it is distributed around in the ledger or other.
It's not a hardware, it's just software. So it's just
a
software encrypted on the phone.
So are you the only company in the world trying to solve identity in a similar way or in such a way, or?
We're the only ones stupid enough to try to build a super app, kind of like WeChat. And, we need more Slovenians, right?
And others, but
the view of us is that the Chinese are ahead in terms of building an integrated app that combines identity, messaging, and money. And it's why, financially, they're doing 10x what Visa and MasterCard are just through QR codes and whatnot. And so they've put those pieces together. It's in a very Orwellian way. It's not a model that fits or works particularly well outside of China. But in terms of scale and cost and integration, it's a great model. So we have to take the things the Chinese have done well, and then we have to put some other oomph in it from, the different systems of the rest of the world where we have different concepts of privacy and security. And we need to make it work in our other culture. We know it can work at scale, but we need to take and learn from what the Chinese have done and then infuse it with a spirit of privacy is a human right, which is a European value, and then a little bit of American pragmatism and entrepreneurialism. And look, we got to look at places like Africa. They've done better with mobile money than just about anyone. Or look at India and what they've done with Aadhaar. And so the thing that's really different now than when I was in the Valley 15 or 20 years ago, the insights, the real models, we're seeing from all around the world. We don't feel a particular belief that the ideas are going to be monopolized by Silicon Valley or the building's going to happen there. It's still just an easy place to get a suntan and raise a couple $100 million. That's what Silicon Valley is about.
Yeah.
What is your basically now a roadmap or next steps where what is defined like major achievements in the future in order for your big vision to take place and to become really tangible and reality and mainstream in a way?
One of the things that we're kind of focusing on is we're trying to find these use cases that are going to bring different communities, groups of people, but it's mainly to kind of showcase that it's actually doable. As Greg said, nobody up until now was able to pull everything we're trying to do and actually not have any data on the users. That's our big kind of differentiator, right? So currently we're focused on getting the cards, for example, into people's hands. We have this XRP card initiative, and we're kind of looking forward to what are the other initiatives that we can pull off. With that, different features that are going to come in because if we're going to service one particular group, maybe they need something else than somebody else. But
a good example is like we're not working directly with them yet, but we're talking closely with them. Is like the Brave browser. They have a crazy ambitious scope too, because they've taken on like Google Chrome, and our investment company that's behind Global ID is invested in Brave as well. And they have a view of a browser where instead of having ads by Google and Facebook, they have their own little internal ecosystem, and it's a privacy-preserving browser. And you're not turned into the product. So imagine what a browser would be like if, in a privacy-preserving way, it knew your identity, it had messaging, and it had money. Anywhere you went, any content that you looked at that you had to pay for, or even e-commerce, it would be one click like Amazon, but not just for Amazon. It would just be a one-click way of the world. So take a privacy-preserving browser, infuse it with a privacy version of identity, make it have messaging built in and money built in. And Brave already has the BAT token. And so you begin to get an ecosystem built around a browser that fundamentally reinvents and kind of is a big FU to Chrome and its way of doing things, and to Facebook. And, they're not that big, but they got, 30 million monthly active users. And it shows a model that things could be different. And so I'm betting on the supposition that the big 5 tech companies today, from the Bay Area and Seattle, may not be the big 5 10 years from now, just like the big 5 10 years before were different companies as well. And so we do see, in a world of DeFi and NFTs and more distributed solutions, that there may be a new group of companies that aren't top-down, silo-based tech companies, and might take a little help from the regulators too, recognizing the anti-competitive consequences of those companies. And I think the European regulators are a step or two ahead of the Americans on this regard. Even the Chinese are realizing that there's problems with WeChat and Alipay. And so, there's a penalty for having turned over essentially sovereignty, innovation, marketplaces to a couple of tech companies where there's like a kind of a winner-take-all society. And, maybe that's not so good for the social compact that we face. And so I am looking for a shakeup of the apple cart in the decade to come.
And it's worth noting also that the users, I think, are recognizing the importance of this. So there's this movement called Web 3.0 movement that's kind of like pushing for getting more control. So it's not just us and some of the companies noticing, it's also a lot of users actually, more and more. I mean, that speaks volumes when 30 million people are using privacy-preserving browser.
It's just beginning.
But really, to be even more tangible, so you said that, top 10 companies in 10 years will not be the same as our top 5 will not be the same as now. So where is like what is the horizon here we are talking about? Is this like 5 years, or 10 years that, that kind of identity solution as a global idea will like really become like the mainstream? So my personality and my, personal data will not be, again, distributed and sold around, all the, companies, but will be really, I'll have control over my identity, sovereign, independent, controllable, using it for all kind of stuff.
Well, we don't know what the next crisis will be. We need a pandemic, we need a financial meltdown, we need a 9/11. These crises tend to help us get to the next platform. One of the things we're seeing right now is a lot of cyber attacks, and we have a world where, both John Snowden and I worked for Booz Allen. I didn't work in the same group. But in the world we live in right now, is all you really need is a username and password, and you can kind of do a lot of damage, right? And so, that is not a great prospect. And we see how like critical infrastructure, like, our transportation systems, our power systems. And, I don't know what the next crisis will be. I guess the last folks that just hacked the system have decided to dissolve because they caused so much damage, they're embarrassed. But you could imagine a system where our current identity systems for identification, authentication, and authorization create such woeful disaster because of either intended or unintended consequences of bad actors. We didn't mean to be this bad. We didn't mean to, like, crash the world. that maybe we'll realize that we need a form of identity that can't just be based on a username and a password, controlled by, the Googles and Apples of the world. And so that's my guess or prediction, is we have another crisis coming that might have to do with like energy systems and transportation systems and our infrastructure. And that will result finally in countries like realizing that trying to control all this top down is an attack vector, is a honeypot, and only through bottom-up solutions will you get resilience. And that's just my science fiction pick. I'm not the person causing that bad stuff to happen, just to be clear. I'm not part of any of those groups. I just,
But we are prepared. I mean, we know in a way that this is going to be a marathon, not a sprint. So it will take time before people adopt this as a technology. It is our job to make it so user-friendly that you don't even know that you're actually using, an app that has your identity and so on. Like, it needs to be so seamless that you don't even think about those things. Instead of just remembering passwords, now you're scanning QR codes to log in. That's it.
I'll give you one thing that could trigger it. Like all these countries that are thinking of issuing central bank digital currency.
Like
China.
European Union also.
Yeah, that's right. And so they talk about it like, well, technologically we could do it. And like in Sweden, we have the e-krona. And so I says, well, that's great that you got this. And I used to work for the Fed. And this is like, let's say you're going to have this e-dollar. Like, yeah, we can do it. And I'm like, okay, well, who can hold it? Well, Americans can hold it. And I'm like, okay, well, what about tourists? How about like trade? How's trade going to work? Like trade, other countries. And what about remittances? And like, next question, right? Like, so if you don't have an identity system, are you going to let, who can hold the e-dollar or the Chinese yuan? Money launderers, terrorist financing, like that's how dollars work. That's how gold work. Are you going to come up with a form of electronic money that's inferior to cash and gold? Like, how are you going to do central bank digital currency without some form of identity? And if you have identity, how is it going to not be privacy intrusive? So when you actually ask the hard questions about digital currency, they show you to the door, right? Like, they don't want to talk about that stuff. And so that really pushes the question that we're not really thinking about this thing, not to mention the fact that like they all freak out. They don't freak out because they think like Libra isn't going to work. They freak out because it is going to work. How are you going to do these things without destroying the sovereignty of other countries? So any of these things that are interoperable at this massive scale are a fundamental challenge to the sovereignty of nations and stuff. And so those kinds of things. So if we have problems that cut across national boundaries, you might need to have identity solutions for identification, authentication, and authorization that cut across too. And gosh, you might even have to do something like the United Nations, all those things the US pulled out of. You might actually need them to be part of the solution.
Yeah, but were you already, in contact with that kind of, global institutions that are kind of also needed for that kind of, global solutions to take place and be implemented, right? You mentioned United Nations.
So we are part of W3C organization, which is setting the internet standards. And we are particularly active in two groups, decentralized identifiers and verifiable credentials. And this is going back to what Greg said earlier, interoperability, right? So I think they are like, given United Nations like a few years back, they had this tenders on like how are we going to solve identity crisis. It was more for the refugees, but they're recognizing those things. The important thing is that I think that if we come up with the standards and everybody uses the standards, then it's going to get much more easier to kind of implement those things. It's kind of like same as TCP/IP. It's a protocol, it's a standard protocol that everybody uses, and now everybody all of a sudden can use mobile phones to serve the web.
So it's an odd game theory type thing. The solution needs to be weak enough so that industries, countries, companies aren't threatened. They need to be like, oh, that's such a weak standard, that doesn't really scare us.
Right.
Those are the really transformational things. If it looks like it's strong enough that it challenges directly the powers that be, they're pretty powerful.
So this is a challenging because, in a one way, you have to be like, so regarding your strategy and go-to-market strategy, because in one way you have to be like really straightforward, aggressive in a way, self-confident. But on the other hand, this is like, threatening for your, strategy, right? And could be a threat to anyone. And
well, we have this practice. We call it passive integration. So let's talk about what a bank grade credential, like a credential that's good enough that you could get a financial account anywhere in the world. Well, there's a service called Plaid. You can log in through Plaid to a bank account or another financial account, and you can basically through scraping download a bunch of information that you've loaded yourself, and then you can take that information, you can go to another service like on Fido or Verif that validate government IDs, and you can cross-reference that. And you can say, well, it's not a guarantee that I'm this person, but I was able to have this government ID, log into this account, I cross-index this information, I turn that into a credential, I put it in my phone, and now when I go somewhere to sign up for a service, do you really want to put me through all the friction of signing up, repeating all this information? You're going to go to the same vendors, but I already have it here. It's cryptographically signed, plus I have all these other credentials. I did the same thing with the phone company, I did a biometric, I got 20 friends to vouch for, I did all this other stuff.
Yeah.
Do you want to use that credential and just give me an account? Or do you want to go through all the friction? And the point is, we didn't have to ask Wells Fargo or Gorenska Bank or Barclays for permission. We just went in because we did a passive integration through Plaid and created a credential. It'll be signed source, Wells Fargo, source Department of Motor Vehicles, California. There's a method, and there you go. You built that credential, and we didn't have to go and ask permission. So that's what we call a passive integration.
Right. And you get this compounded credential, as Greg put it, that should work everywhere. Right.
Now, they can say, no, we want to make you do all that stuff all over again because what? We like you watching you do push-ups and stuff. But, but there's an opportunity cost to them not making your account portable.
Where do you see the tipping point from the user perspective that will say no to all these, multiple sign-ins and passwords crap and just say, I want to use, global ID type of solution that, makes my life 100 times easier, safer, more controllable?
It is a chicken and an egg problem, right? So in a way, everybody we talk to, they're so excited about controlling their identity on their phone and so on. On the other hand, you need to have services where you can actually use that. So it's, as I said earlier, it's like one use case at a time, and then the more use cases you get. One thing that kind of Greg mentioned as well is we're trying to build an open platform so anybody can come and anybody can use it, use our SDKs, APIs. We're trying to make it so easy for verified credentials, for money, for messaging to work that, as I said earlier, you should just focus on your stuff and build your own kind of core stuff, but then leave people to kind of do other stuff.
But look, at the end of the day, if you look at the history of the internet and innovation, the things that kind of push things along are the things that aren't well served by traditional gambling, sex. A good one for me lately, I went to get my COVID test before I got on the plane, and I get there and they say, oh, well, before we can do this, we need we need to look at your government ID. And duh, I didn't bring it, but of course I had a copy in my global ID. And I whip out my phone to show them the government ID. And there's this moment of hesitation. And they're like, well, that's not your government ID. And I'm like, well, do you really want to just touch it? Or do you need to see the information on it? Because here it is, electronically, the information's on it. Is there some reason that you think that piece of paper, because it's kind of dirty, is better than the electronic version? Okay. And at some point, that party that's relying on the credential will simply say, you're right. I don't need to touch it. I just need to see it. And having it electronically, that might be more secure than the piece of paper. And so the pandemic is one of the things that helps because people are more likely for all these, I just was told for the restaurants here in Maribor, is that how I pronounce it? Maribor.
Close
enough. They're supposed to be checking to make sure you got your vaccination. And so the question is, what form do you want to see that? Do you want to see a little piece of paper that somebody wrote something on? Or do you want a credential that's electronically provable. Like this is
that's the
the
main
end of
thing.
the day.
Can you prove to somebody that you actually have a COVID vaccination credential without even exposing your first name, last name, and so on? That's the big thing.
Did you thought about in this, since we are all in the pandemic and everything, about this vaccination passport, and that this would be one of the integrations or one of the solutions?
I have it, but the question is who will rely on it. So that's why we say identity is a right and a responsibility. The responsibility is you have to rely on it. Like if you will only do this interview with me if I have my COVID credential, do you want to see my little piece of paper, or do you want to see something that's electronically signed from my phone that your phone can read? And so it's in the eye of the beholder.
And for that purpose, we actually built something that we call Trust Framework. Kind of goes back to the groups, but the idea is if you board a plane, for example, with this COVID credential, vaccine passport, now, if you share it with somebody, it's going to say, well, this particular John Doe administered vaccine. And then...
Who the hell is that?
Yeah, who the hell is that? Should I trust that person or not? It works at Walgreens, maybe not. You don't know. So what we build is actually cryptographic proofs that if that John Doe is in particular group, and that group, for example, Walgreens vaccination group belongs to, I don't know, US vaccination group, and that group belongs to CDC, and then eventually WHO. So
it's like
all you gotta trust is actually that John Doe from cryptographic proofs belongs to the WHO group, and that's enough for and I haven't seen that anywhere else in the market that somebody would build something like that, especially
it's that
in a
chain,
self-sovereign way.
That chain of provenance. When you get your presents on Christmas, did Santa Claus deliver them, or was it really one of the elves? And do you care? We know that your kid wants to think it was Santa Claus, but if Santa Claus delegated one of the elves with authority, and he has a credential, he's doing it on behalf of Santa Claus, is that as good as Santa Claus? But most of the trust problems of the world at scale are that problem. And so there's your identity, you as an individual, but you're often acting in a role on behalf of a company or a cause or something. And so this group architecture takes the concept of identity and it puts it in a social construct. Now, of course, that's what Facebook does. It has groups, but Facebook has groups without trusted identities because they're full of fake identities. And so, yes, it's a social network, but it's not one for trusted engagement. It's great for untrusted engagement. It's a lot of fun. It has lots of clickbait. It has interesting but not true stories. But that only gets you so far in life.
But this is like this group architecture is basically like the really primitive, society architecture that we used to live in, right?
There used to be tribal,
yeah,
right?
Tribals, exactly.
Now it's electronic, but we are taking you back to tribal times, but doing it at global scale. So we want to be in our local tribe, but we get around and we move around the world, and so we want to basically have things still feel like a local tribe, but do it at a global scale level.
And digital one.
And digital. That's the digital one. That's right.
The big difference.
And you want to use it not just online. We want to use it in real world. Imagine a sporting event, like we're going to all go on a fondo. Everything's a bicycle ride. But we want to do it for 5,000 people. And everybody knows what the route's going to be. You ought to be able to organize that totally online. People sign up, they pay, they sign their releases, they get they get a number. They go, their phone is their tracking device. They don't need a tracking device. They go past the start line. They go past the finish line. They get their times because they're tracking not for the organization. You're tracking for yourself. You either share it or you don't. You don't share it because you're embarrassed because you had a bad time, or you share it because you're Superman. And so you could run a whole physical, real world event, but set it all up, do all the credentials virtually, right? And so that's a great world, right? That's a world where you can have high standards, high trust, and absolutely low cost, low friction. And it can be very engaging. We're all out there sharing, meeting people. We could have met everyone before. We ride all together. We have a group and we can talk about it after. And yet there was nobody on the ground doing it. This conference is a perfect example. Next year, we could do a much more credential-based version of this conference and, just take it to the next level.
Yep.
We are super excited about the next year and all the challenges that you throw us in our minds and thoughts. It was a great talk. Can you imagine that already 60 minutes basically passed? So
okay.
It was an hour.
I thought we said 45.
It was amazing talk. So much. Thank you for stopping by and having you. Really a pleasure to have you all both here. Wish you all the best for the future. Greg, you enjoy the kilometers over Bršić and wish you nice riding here in Slovenia. Maybe last final question. Who will win the Tour de France this year? Since we are at the cycling topic, so just to finish, like we should.
I'm hoping it'll be 1-2 and they'll just reverse the order. Because that's what creates a real rivalry, is bouncing it back and forth. So that's what I'm looking for this year.
Yeah, I think 80% of Slovenians want the same thing. I don't know, but yeah, I don't follow much, but I would agree. Like I would like the rivalry to go on for quite a few years.
But that was one of the best, if not the best, Tour de France ever last year. It was just amazing.
It was amazing. I agree. Also, I'm also a road biker myself. Also have, of course, a mountain bike because we near the hill. But yeah, my primary passion is the road bike, so I enjoy it so much. So to wrap it up, thanks again. I'm sure we will stack our cooperation and collaboration next year. Also for the next Podim to figure some crazy ideas. You have them already, but this was just a too short notice to implement them. But I'm sure we'll see each other also in the future. And also, Greg, you'll be in the panel, really exciting panel tomorrow, talking about the new monetization model, NFTs and everything. So also looking forward to that. So see you tomorrow online and hopefully also in person in the near future. So thanks again for having you.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you.